Hello and welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast. I'm Morag. Join me each week in conversation with leading ecological thinkers, activists, authors, designers, and practitioners to explore what now? What is the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive and regenerative way forward, to myceliate possibilities, to explore what a thriving one planet way of life could look like. My guests offer voices of clarity and common sense. Andrew's passion is traveling the world documenting epic permaculture projects to share inspiration of what's possible. He's filmed in places such as India, Egypt, Mexico, Cuba, and throughout the United States. When I spoke to him, he was about to jump on a plane to head off to Senegal. You can watch all of his YouTube over on his YouTube channel, and we're linking that here in the show notes. The Sense Making a Changing World podcast is a project of the Permaculture Education Institute. We teach permaculture design, teaching, and livelihood skills online to people on 6 continents, who in turn localize and enrich it and find appropriate ways to apply the planet care ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share wherever they are. I'm recording this episode from my hand-built solar-powered studio here on beautiful Gubbi Gubbi country, surrounded by my permaculture design gardens in a permaculture village. Before we jump in, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to the Sense Making a Changing World podcast on your favorite podcast app. And please do leave us a 5-star review and a lovely comment. It does indeed help the bots to find our show. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today, Andrew. I've been really in awe of the stories that you've been telling in the world of permaculture. I kind of see you as a public professor of epic permaculture projects, and it's just wonderful to have a chance to chat with you, because I was listening to a conversation that you had with Nate Hagans recently, and you were talking a lot about things like water democracy, and I think this is absolutely a fantastic concept to get our heads around, to think about how can we scale up permaculture? How can we take the concepts that are in this permaculture world and apply it at the scale that we need in the world today? So one of the things that you're doing is going around to many countries, researching and documenting this in your fantastic YouTube clips that you make, of films that you make about this, and also teaching it through many different forms. So welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're about to head off to Senegal in just a few days to go and visit more epic projects. So maybe we could just begin with, how did permaculture call you? Well, let's just start there right at the beginning, and we'll head to our epic projects in a moment.
Yeah, well, somewhere around the early 1990s, as a young man, I got the sense that things were not as I was told they were, and that things were actually going awry. And so, I started seeking other ways from what I was taught. And I went into different counterculture groups and traveled around and looked around. And actually, my first exposure to regenerative design was traveling through northern New Mexico in the United States and running into the earth ships, the tire houses built by, Michael Reynolds, and Taos, New Mexico. There's all these earth ships. And I came across this and I was like, all I need to do is learn how to build an earth ship, and I can grow my food in there, and I can process my wastewater in there, and it's heated by the sun, and I can have my energy, my solar panels on there. And I was like, wow, I was naive, and I was like, I just would need my earth ship pod, and whatever happens in the world, I can sit in my little pod and, recycle my own wastes and grow food and everything like that. So, but that turned me on to the concept of regeneration. And then I dropped out of college, and I had been traveling around. That's when I was exposed to that. And then I ended up going back to college at a place called Prescott College in Arizona, which is a liberal arts environmental school. And at the time, in the early 1990s, I guess this is the mid 90s by the time I went there, they had a permaculture class taught by the Sonoran Permaculture Guild, Tim Murphy. I took a class from Barbara Rose, Brad Lancaster, who, became very well known. And so I took the permaculture class as part of my college education because I was interested more in architecture, eco design, but everybody said you got to take permaculture. And suddenly I was exposed to plants. Like I had never had an interest in plants before. I grew up in the city. I grew up in Philadelphia, the urban East Coast megalopolis. And that was it. I mean, that was 1994 is when I took my permaculture design course in Tucson, Arizona. And I was just like, this is my life. So that's been almost 30 years, but that was my introduction right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, fantastic. And I'm curious about this idea that permaculture seems to be embedded more in colleges in the States than it is here in Australia. And I wonder how that's happened. And I mean, you're involved in that as well. Most of the permaculture education that happens here in Australia that I've ever come across in any substantial and continuous way is actually, outside of the formal education systems. There are attempts to have it in different ways, and it's in schools, but not so much in universities, which is where it really needs to be. And I think it really needs to be a foundational course that people from all different faculties attend.
Well, I'm an anomaly.
Right.
And it's not that, and my university is a land grant state university. I mean, it is an agriculture university. It is like, if you look at the makeup of the university, there's a great diversity. I mean, there's people doing GMO research and nuclear research and the whole thing. I'm not at some radical institution by any means, but, but there was student demand. So it all started from a group on campus formed, a permaculture group, and a student had taken a permaculture design course, and they started a club. And so they had this club, and I moved to town around that time, and I gave a talk. And some of the members of this permaculture club came to my public talk that I did in town, and they were like, "Wow, we like this guy." They're like, "Hey, will you come and talk to our club?" So I gave a talk to their club, and there was this one woman, Sarah LaRock, who I credit, and she basically said, Oregon State University is going to have a permaculture class, and you're going to teach it. And she went and she lobbied the administration. She went to the horticulture department. She got signatures from students saying, yes, we would take this class. And she said, we want a permaculture class. And we want this guy to teach it. And I had already taught permaculture at Prescott College, my liberal arts, kind of fringe environmental school in Arizona. So I'd already taught at the college level of permaculture, even though I was a young man. And so they tried me out. We did a class. It went very well. And then, they're like, well, okay, we can pay for one class, but you have to start to figure out we can't pay you though. You have to figure out how to make your own money within the university. So I got some sponsorship from a student group for another year. And then Toby Hemingway, who, you might know, he hooked me up with this contract with the state of Oregon to create a online course and a conference for the state agency that builds low-income housing for throughout the state. So I got funded and I did this whole program, and then I started developing my online program. This is 2011. I did summer workshops. I still did other jobs, and it just built steadily, so 2009 to now, where I have this like pretty large program within the, it's not really, it's a program with a lowercase p, meaning it's not like a recognized program, but I have a series of classes, and it's primarily online. I teach on campus in the fall, which is coming up soon. And then I have this online program I've been developing since 2011, so 12 years. And we're actually the largest non-credit online program at the university.
Wow.
By far.
Wow.
So people that want to take an online PDC basically that's our people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you go. Anyone who's listening, who's a student at a university who's wanting to get some stuff happening there, it is about getting active, getting engaged, lobbying, and getting it there. That's a wonderful story.
Because the students are the clients. You know, that's the customers of the university. So they have like students have a disproportionate voice at universities. They don't realize it. But like when students band together and come and approach administration with something, like they have to listen.
Well, there's a really good form of climate activism, isn't it? To campaign to get permaculture course at university. That's a fantastic form of practivism. Yeah. So let's talk about water, because this seems to be a core thread that runs through so much of your work in terms of what you're exploring with your epic projects and what you're documenting. Maybe just we could talk a little bit about the Pani Foundation, because that is an extraordinary story of change and transformation. And I think what I find really interesting about it too, it's not just about the techniques and the strategies, but how it went to get the engagement of all of those villages. There's thousands of villages, and that process of really amplifying really common sense strategies.
Yeah. So I had the fortune of connecting with the Pani Foundation. I went there for the first time back in 2019, 2020, just before COVID. And I visited a couple villages with the Pani Foundation. I made a couple videos. And then just recently, I was back in India this last winter, and I visited 4 villages with the Pani Foundation. And I've put out I've got 2 more videos that are imminently coming out right now. The Pani Foundation is, in my mind, in my experience of seeing a lot of different things around the world, is having the largest, most like rapid scale impact of any project that I've seen. Now, the engagement, I mean, part of it is that it was founded by a very well-known Bollywood star. So like there's a fame movie star, you know, Amir Khan is like, I don't know, in the US, you might say Tom Cruise or something, like a leading man who's been in many, many, many movies and is known by everybody on, you know, and so there's that, but they tapped into the basic human nature of competition and flipped it into a positive. So they created a competition between villages, and, you know, so this tribalism, the village, and which village can install the most amount of water harvesting structures in a 45-day period. And they hyped it up, and they got sponsorship. Well, Amir Khan himself apparently has put in a large part of his fortune that he's amassed has gone into this. So, I mean, like, much respect for Amir Khan. I hope to meet Amir Khan someday. Who knows? But just to tell him, like, thank you. But he's heard it from everywhere. And so they had large cash prizes for the villages. I mean, the prizes were not insignificant at all. And they brought representatives of the villages, and they brought them to a training center. Now, let me pause for a minute and recognize that there were some villages that cracked the code in Maharashtra that fixed their water systems, their water supplies, and did all this work back in the 80s. And this last time I was in India, after our day of filming, Dr. Pol was like, okay, now we're going to go visit Haware Bazaar. Haware Bazaar is a very famous village in India, and they fixed their water systems, fixed their watershed, did reforestation back in the 80s, and like flipped their whole village. And they literally have there is like a village tourism. So they have literally tourists coming from all over India to visit like the magical village that turned everything around and super prosperous every day. So we went to Haware Bazaar and actually got to see Haware Bazaar. It was very amazing. It was like sunset, so I didn't film. I have to go back and spend days there to film. But Amir Khan was made aware of Haware Bazaar and some other villages that had completely fixed their water problems. And so he was like, him and Satyajit Bakhtal, who's the director of the Pani Foundation, and it was Amir's childhood friend. They said, hey, if Haware Bazaar can do it, everywhere can do it in Maharashtra. And so they devised the contest. Mm-hmm. And they brought people to Haware Bazaar and other villages that had done similar work, and they trained them. And then they sent them back to their villages and they competed and they had 45 days. And Shramadan, which is volunteerism, is a huge part of it. So, I mean, they got points. So they were graded. It was like, it's a very scientific, detailed, the competition. It's like fair. It's a fair competition. And they have, very intricate grading system, and volunteerism is a big part of that. Do you get everybody out? So not only did they fix their watersheds, but they also crossed political parties. I mean, political divisions in India are as brutal as they are everywhere else. But this thing with, the different warring parties, where everybody was able to come out, and they had about 8,000 villages participate in the competition between 2017, 2018, 2019. They haven't had the Water Cup competition since 2019. They've transitioned now, and they've taken of those 8,000 villages, 1,000 of those villages. Now, I just want to take a second and say, what is a village, right? We're talking about like maybe average of maybe 2,000 people, maybe about 1,000 hectares. That's about I would say from my experience, that's about the average, maybe 2,000 people, 1,000 hectares of land. So 1,000 of these villages, right? So we're talking millions of people now. 1,000 of these villages they said, okay, you have utterly fixed your water problems, and now you are qualified to participate in, well, they've had two versions. The first one was called the Prosperous Village Competition, where they had a whole bunch of different criteria, but then COVID hit and they had to sort of reorganize. And so then they came out of that with the Prosperous Farmer Competition. So they said, okay, these 1,000 villages now, they have all the water they need. They have water stored in the ground for years. All the reservoirs are full. They could survive 2 to 3 years of devastating drought, and they'd still have water. So they got the leading scientists, the leading agronomists from the country, well, I guess from Maharashtra, and they did an online training during COVID of these farmers groups. So they said, okay, you have to form a group of minimum 25 farmers. So people got together. So no one's now working on their individual farms. They got together in a collective, and then they took this online trainings, and they were given SOPs, standard operating practices, to follow. Organic, for best practices for organic production. And these villagers, I mean, I visited 4 of these villages. I visited a bunch of these groups, and I visited these amazing villages, and then none of the villages I visited even won. So I saw this amazing work, and like, they weren't even the winners. I mean, people went, this was the first time they held the Farmers Cup competition. People went really, really far with this. Like, people's lives were changed. There was women's groups. There was men's groups. They collectively bought seed together. They learned how to do germination tests. They learned how to like apply to make and then apply biofertilizers, biopesticides, and they rocked it. These groups, the groups that followed the SOPs, it's extraordinary abundance. And you'll see in my videos. And I'm getting to I've done 2, but like the 4th video is the village that you're like, these people have just, you forget when you're there that you're even touring villages that were devastated 5 years ago. You're like, oh, I thought I was touring a prosperous Indian villages, because the turnaround has been so dramatic. Like, these people literally are rich now. I mean, and they're facing the problems of affluence, right? And,
the rapid pace of this transformation is quite extraordinary, really, when we're thinking about what we're facing globally with, ecological devastation, biodiversity loss, desertification. And when you look at this, what can happen? But there's certain things that make it happen well, isn't there? And I wonder how we can translate ideas like this at this epic scale to, say, your country or my country, where we don't sort of have those cultural practices of that collective of the village per se.
Yeah, I say it's not just that. You were talking about the watershed democracy thing. They're really lucky there because the village boundaries are the watershed boundaries. And so their decision-making body is also a watershed decision-making body, where the crisscross arbitrary grid of property boundaries, property lines here, and I imagine in Australia, like we're at a real deficit because of the basically like the colonial grid that divided everything up into equal rectangles and squares in order to commoditize the land. It's like every private property, you have some random square rectangle, then you're like, how does this fit within the watershed? Like we're at this real disadvantage from a village that is already managing the whole watershed.
Yeah, it's interesting if you look back in Australia, how it was before it was Australia. It was hundreds of countries, indigenous countries, that were all, if you look at the map of the bioregions of Australia and then you look at the map of the indigenous countries, it's pretty much the same perfectly. And so, rethinking how we govern and layering those bioregional concepts back into our governance system, I think is a huge part of it. And that may not necessarily be through a formal government system, but there's this informal inner layer of collectives of people. And I think that sense of being able to understand what is possible when you do a bioregional project, to then unlock the possibilities in the imagination in other places. And I think this is one of those key things of what you're doing through this storytelling. You're potentially telling the story of what's possible if we shift our perception, shift our perspective on the issues.
Yeah. I feel like when I teach permaculture, like my main thing is teaching watershed awareness, that so much comes from that. And, people are like, wow, like it's like a whole different perspective in the world when you look at the natural divisions of landscape. Like so many things make sense and then so many things don't make sense. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the informal, collectivism around that is our best shot, because changing the way that property is legally divided is like, ooh, that's a,
nowhere to begin with
post-collapse kind of thing. It's not what you do right now.
What possibilities are you seeing so far? I mean, as well as the permaculture education and the understanding of watershed, are you seeing movements towards bioregional collectives happening? I know there was a big push back in the 1980s. I remember there's a whole lot of talk about bioregions, and then it just kind of filtered away a bit. And I'm starting to feel like there's a sense of it re-emerging now. What's your sense where you are?
Well, I want to say a couple of things. I mean, one thing is kind of going back to the Pani Foundation for a minute. I've had people recently contacting me from both Mexico and Bolivia who are organizing their own water cup competitions. So that as a sort of leverage point, like, I don't know, why don't we have a competition? Like that is a sticky idea.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. And I hope that that's happening even more places that I don't know about. As far as it's tricky, like there's some really tricky things with bioregionalism in a way, because the global transportation system, like there's so many people and there's such high populations in places that cannot support those populations, so it's very tricky. Like, I mean, of course we want to restore our watersheds. We want to have a productive bioregion here in the Pacific Northwest, but we can't draw a line. I live in a pretty agriculturally productive like my bioregion is agriculturally productive. It's the Pacific Northwest of the US, but you cross over the mountains and you're in high desert, and you keep going, and the American West is a vast desert, and you'll get to places like Las Vegas and Phoenix and, places where there's just too many people on very marginal lands. And so, I can't say, oh, we should be a enclosed bioregion, and the good people of Las Vegas, well, that's just their problem. It's just like we're kind of far gone in that sense. I'm visiting Senegal. I'm leaving on Tuesday. Today's Thursday, so I've been doing a lot of research just to kind of wrap my mind around things. Senegal imports 70% of their food. I'm looking on Google Earth, I'm looking, okay, Dakar, a city of 4 million people. And then I think there's maybe 16 million people in Senegal. I'm looking all around. I'm like, where are all the farms? Like, where is the big agricultural area? And it's very spotty. You're like, oh, that looks like a farm. That looks like a village, but it doesn't look. And then when I found out they import 70% of the food, I was like, that all of a sudden that made sense. And where do they import it from? They import it from, Europe.
I was going to say, are they importing it from, the Russia and Ukraine area, or is it?
It didn't say. It said like when it listed like Poland, and it didn't list Russia and Ukraine. But I did notice that the president of Senegal went to the Africa summit in Moscow. So I was like, well, they must, Russia has their hold on a lot of the world's grain supply at this point. And I'd have to look exactly where. And I spent time in Egypt, where, 100 million people live in the Nile River Valley, but they are actually the world's largest importer of grain. And then it's coming into Egypt, and then they're dispersing it south into Sudan and Somalia and Ethiopia, So it's like, to think that we can sort of retreat to our cozy bioregions, those of us who live in productive places, it's like the world's a little bit beyond that.
I don't think
that ideal sense.
We absolutely can't retreat to it. And I think this is a little bit of that sense of, I don't know, a bit like what you're talking about before with the Earthship, and this concept often before when we first, come across permaculture, oh, this is something we can do for ourselves. Or if we restore our bioregion, well, this is something we can stay in our bioregion. But I think in a way, like the piece of land where we are, whether we own it or not, there's we have a responsibility to be taking care of it, in the bioregion that we're from, to be restoring it, repairing it, not necessarily to have closed borders, but just to be thinking in that sense, to restore the waterways, to restore the biodiversity corridors and all those sorts of things. And so having that sense of that scale beyond our backyards, beyond even just a village or a town, into a bioregional scale, I think gives us that possibility of seeing our work somewhere else. And I think, this idea of scale to me strikes me in your work. You're going to Senegal and you're looking at the whole site. You're not just looking at one in your research. You're going, okay, well, what's happening in all of Senegal? And when you're going to Senegal, what's your interaction there? Are you advising? Are you documenting?
I'm documenting. Yeah. So I was invited initially by an organization out of Germany called Planet Wild, who they're like us. People pay them money and then they vet different projects. They fund actions in those different projects. And so they hooked up with an organization that works in Senegal and other places. It's a US-based organization called Trees for the Future, who have planted 300 million trees since their inception. Their goal is, I think, 1 billion trees by 2030. So they're really trying to ramp up. And so basically this organization wanted to bring me to, like, we're both kind of doing video documentation work, but to be like their expert that's going to vet the project, because the Trees for the Future actually does like farm-based permaculture type plantings, multi-storied, multi-species plantings, hedgerows, so they're kind of like, oh, well, here, we want to come and document. They're funding the planting of 40,000 trees there while we're there. So we're going to go and see this. But then, do you know Natalie Topa?
Yeah. Good friend of hers.
So Natalie Topa, who now works for the World Food Program. So I was like, that whole thing is like 5 days. I was like, I'm not going to Senegal for 5 days. I'm going across the planet. Like, what else is going on here that I can see? So I contacted Natalie. And so she hooked me up with the World Food Program, that's the United Nations. And they were generous enough with their time to say that they would take me to document some of their projects. I think their projects are more monoculture tree plantation. I'll see what it is. But, they are doing some large scale plantings as part of the Great Green Wall. The Great Green Wall of Africa is the band of trees being planted through 22 countries across the width of Africa to arrest the southern migration of the Sahara Desert. And it's interesting, like I said, like when I'm going somewhere, I'm like looking at Google Earth, you know, I'm kind of a Google Earth nerd. And so one of the places that I'm going with the WFP is the northern border of Senegal. There's a river there, and that river divides Senegal from Mauritania. The river is, there's a lot of vegetation around the river, but then if you go north of there, you see the lateral sand dunes just like stop there at the border. And so you can really see, you're like, this river system, like the trees present here, I mean, this is literally the boundary, because that's where the dunes stop. And so you realize, you know, if this river system was deforested, or maybe it has been deforested, I'm not sure about the natural history. Actually, I'm sure it's been deforested, but you know, this is like the frontier here, the first line of defense against those sand dunes. I mean, I spent time in the western desert of Egypt, in a place, Dakhla Oasis, where it hadn't rained in 13 years. And like the pattern of the dunes, the marching of the dunes, like they said, like, oh, it could change overnight, you know? So I mean, it's powerful forces with that wind and sand, and trees are the remedy, basically. That's the wall. So that's the Great Green Wall of Africa.
Are you taking your family?
Yeah, I'm taking my wife. My wife's kind of like, you don't go anywhere without me, you know?
Good.
So, yeah. So my wife is coming. It's the first 2 weeks of school for my son. He's a little bit like, okay, another country. All right. I just want to hang out with my friends. You know, he's a teenager now. So he's going to stay here. And we'll be gone 19 days total, which still is not that long. I was just in India for like 66 days or something. I like to, that's much, you know, if I'm going to go somewhere, I want to go and like really sink in. And so this 19 days was about as long as we could logistically do it to go to Senegal on short notice, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't wait to see what you find there. That sounds amazing.
No, I was going to say the work of Trees for the Future sounds like right up our permaculture alley. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And you also documented the Chinampas as well in Mexico. What are some of the, so there's the Chinampas there, there's the work in India. What are some of the other epic areas that you've visited?
Well, the other one that we did that is just, again, it's a wonderful video. It hasn't gotten the kind of views that other ones have. I don't know why, but the indigenous Hawaiians, the Ahupua'a, we did, actually it's our longest video. We did like almost a 30, it's like a 28 minute mini documentary with a group called the Nation of Hawaii, which is an indigenous sovereignty group that has the only land in all the islands of Hawaii that's actually deeded to Native people. Wow. I mean, imagine that. Everything else is private property. And they only got this land because they literally took over a beach for like a year and a half. They built a whole village there. This is after a whole legacy of protests. And finally, the government was like, okay, if we give you this piece of land here, like, will you leave? And they were like, okay. So they were given this piece of land. So now they manage the piece of land they're on. They manage a lot of land behind it. It's a very large project. And they're restoring their traditional ahupua'a, which is the watershed scale design, basically. So that's a great project. That's a great video. Even just stuff in the US, another great video that we put out recently is about a project in the city of Oakland, California, called Planting Justice, which basically hires formerly incarcerated people. It's a plant nursery. It's a permaculture plant nursery. They inherited the genetic collection of a very well-known nursery that was closing its doors in Northern California. So now they're in the city. They're in one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods in the entire city of Oakland. So it's a rough place. I mean, it's like a dilapidated, it's like there's a lot of garbage and graffiti and, all that stuff. And they have this permaculture nursery that has this incredible selection and, of good portion of the people working there are formerly incarcerated, which when you come out of prison, it's extremely difficult to find work. Nobody wants to hire you. And so that's a great project that we filmed recently. I also just go to a lot of kind of like individual permaculture homestead type places and just show like really cool systems that people are doing. Mm-hmm. So like down in Southern Oregon, Don Tipping's place, and I went to Ben Falk's place on the East Coast. And another one we just went out. So I just published a video today from New York City. I was just on the East Coast visiting my family. I said I'm from Philadelphia. And I visited a site that guerrilla gardeners, a community of guerrilla gardeners, took over this abandoned rail yard. It was basically like a industrial toxic zone with heavy metals, and they guerrilla gardened it. Nobody noticed for about a year and a half because they kept the edges all full of rubble and garbage and everything like that. And inside, they were bringing in compost, bringing in food scraps, and they built this incredible oasis. And now it's been 12 years. You got to watch. I mean, it's the coolest site. And it's like right in Queens in this totally like nasty industrial zone, huge train yard. And they built this beautiful permaculture paradise garden. So I just went and I just released that video today. I got another one I filmed when I was over on the East Coast. We visited the oldest non-Native American food forest in the United States. So it was an agroforestry experiment that was planted in 1917 by Hershey, by a guy, John Hershey, who's part of like the whole like Hershey, Pennsylvania and chocolate and all that. And so it's like a over 100-year-old planting of this whole diversity of all the different nuts and fruits, a selection of nuts and fruits, covering one part of it's like 70 acres, another part, I mean, it's a lot of trees, but now like a housing development's kind of built up within part of it. Another part, you know, it's like the city's kind of grown up around it. And so we're just sort of documenting heirloom fruit trees and, you know, what does a 100-year-old pawpaw tree look like and how productive is it? And the chestnuts and heart nuts and walnuts and hickories and everything like that. So it's not all, I don't just do water, you know?
Well, it's obviously, I mean, permaculture, it's diverse. I mean, there's so much. Just, I do see a lot of your water concepts, and it you know, it holds, I mean, particularly in places like Australia, I mean, water too is a very central part of any of the conversations that we begin to talk about permaculture. It's just, being part of the
I'm also like a real student of the scales of landscape permanence, where water's the first thing. I mean, if you get your water design, you have a good water design, then all the other layers of design build on top of that. So I figure educating people about water is the most important thing, because then they can have a good basis for all the other parts of the permaculture flower.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, just like in a very practical sense, do you do all your editing, or do you have people helping you do that? And how do you find all these great film like sites to go and visit? I
have edited most of my videos. After I visited India for the first time in 2017, 2018, I was like, I want to go back. I want to actually learn how to do videography. I want to get some good equipment. And so through the guidance and counsel of the people that do the media stuff at the university, I was able to really choose like what equipment to buy and, you know, try out a lot of different things. And so, you know, that's one of the things about being connected with the university is there's a lot of infrastructure. So I have people that I could learn from, and, you know, because they've been working with me developing online courses all this time. And then I started learning editing. And but in recent times, between working with the university collaboratively on some of these videos, like the Chinampas one was that was the one video I've done that I did none of the filming and editing. And that's like, you know, awesome. But mostly I'm doing filming. Okay, so recently I have a great guy who I work with who's a permaculture guy, a young man, lives in Eugene here, not far away, who's really into this. And so we have been doing a lot of filming together, and he edited the one I did from Oakland. And then this great woman from the university, she edited a couple of my videos, and then she left the university. And then, so I would say, of all my videos, maybe 6 have been edited by somebody else. So I primarily do the editing. But now recently, when I go somewhere, I really try to get a second camera person.
Yeah.
So I can like be in it, and I can just have someone else capturing, so it's not like all on me. And so, you know, I work with, and I just find really good people. And, you know, I've been funding this through my program, through my online classes. And especially with COVID, we had a huge skyrocket in enrollment. And so I funded a lot of the video work there. But now I'm actually getting to the point where my vision has outstripped my program's ability to support it. So I'm actually, like, for the first time, I mean, I've been, you know, bootstrapping since 2009 here, doing this all myself. For the first time, I'm thinking about reaching out to some other people and seeing if there's some support for someone who wants to like help us take this to the next level, basically.
Yeah.
So
you see this, the film part of your work being
video production.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of it as like the free education project.
Yeah.
You know, we have paid courses, and we have a lot of like intensive instructor involvement in our permaculture design courses and all that. But my heart is in creating high quality free content that doesn't sit behind a paywall, to just democratize the education. I mean, we're too far down this road here to like not have people have this information, basically. Yeah,
that's right. And to be able to switch people onto the possibilities and to show those very strategic examples and, you know, snippets of ideas that can just, like you're saying before, that get sticky, you know, and that's the stuff that we need, that we really need. Totally. Yeah. Well, I hope that works, because that would be an amazing thing to be constantly going at. So do people come and tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you should go and film that? Or do you just, your radar is out there and you just notice things, think, oh, I need to go and video that?
Yes, I would say it's a little of both. But recently, like the Hawaii thing, for instance, was someone saying, hey, come film, you should come film this project, you know, inviting me in, basically. The Senegal thing is someone, you know, literally saying, we'll pay for you to come, like, we will, you know, we'll bring you here. That's what I like now. And I'm not going to like spill the beans, but I'm in conversations with other people who are like, hey, maybe you come, you know, why don't you come here? The India stuff, I just love India.
Me too.
And I know it's such a wonderful place. And from going to the International Permaculture Conference there in 2017, that just sort of set off this cascade of connections and events. And now I've got so many different invitations there. I've got places I'd like to see. I'd love to go back to India. But, you know, really it comes down to me going, where is the most crucial story? Like, where's it happening? Where's the place that, you know, and can I go there? Like the Chinampas thing, that was me. I was like, man, we got to create a really solid educational piece on the Chinampas that's like really detailed, because people know about it. You know, there's certain things I'll look up something. I'm like, man, the Chinampas, it's so epic. But then you're like, there's nothing out there that really articulates like the system to give you, you know, I want to tell a story in a way, of course it's exciting and artistic, but that gives you enough practical information that you can like get something actionable from it.
Yeah, that's so great, because I think, you know, a lot of the documentation of Chinampas until then has really been, this was something that happened before. as opposed to it being a current practice that can be, myceliated. Yeah. So I think, that is absolutely brilliant. And
well, actually, I want to say it's YouTube. Yeah. Because I saw Lucio Usubiaga, who's the main guy in the Chinampas video. I saw him on a YouTube video about like food in the Chinampas. So I started watching and I'm like, that dude. I'm like, wait, what is he doing? You know? And the same with the Pani Foundation. I somehow watch one of their like subtitled videos in Hindi, and I'm like, nobody knows about this. This is incredible. So, I reached out to them. I cold call people if I'm super inspired to go film their thing.
Yeah. I'm hoping to get a film team together to go. I know, I do a lot of work with the refugee communities across East Africa, and there's a myceliation of permaculture projects throughout those camps, and to actually go and do a documentation of how permaculture is being applied from not from an agency perspective, but from a refugee-led, community-led, often youth and young women-led program. And that's kind of something that I'm trying to get together at the moment. But it takes a lot of organization to get into camps and all that kind of stuff. So that will...
I mean, these things are massive logistical, endeavors between the equipment, between the skills, the equipment, the organization of files, making sure you have backups, and then just the filming part, and then the travel part where you're going to stay, and then finding someone who can who's your person who can really speak good English for the most part, and then coming back and then organizing the story. I mean, it's just it's a major deal.
It's a major task. I want to ask you about that story part. So do you write or plan your story before you go, or do you just have a broad structure and then come back and weave the story together? How do you come up with your story threads?
I'm very in the moment. If I'm working with someone else, they might want to storyboard something out and we'll talk it through. But a lot of it becomes intuitive. There's certain things like Senegal. I'm like, okay, well, you're taking us to this region. It's a little wetter. I'm like, oh, and then the WFP wants to go to the dry region. I'm like, oh yeah, we got to go to the desert. We have to hit multi-climates. We're going to hit different tactics, but I have no idea. Usually it just sort of unfolds. It's all, my work is in finding the person and the place. If you find the person and the place, you just follow.
Yeah.
You don't have to really do anything. You're just
show me your curiosity. And it seemed like I'm glad you said that, because my films are also quite like that. It's when you show up and you start being in conversation with a landscape and with the people there, the questions unfold just naturally through the conversation and gives a shape. Yeah.
However, I must say that the research beforehand, just the story I told you about how the sand dunes stop at the border between Mauritania and Senegal from, just from Google Earth, and me looking around and looking at a lot of my study of a place is from looking at Google Earth and just really interpreting the landscape, what's happening. And I feel like that actually informed, that has planted these story things. And I'm like, where's all the farms? I'm like, click, what percentage of food is produced in Senegal? Oh, 30% import, so the research brings in these pieces. And then when I'm on the ground, that's going to surface when I'm talking to someone, or just in the whole perspective, of oh, how could you incorporate food into these agroforestry systems? Because you obviously need to grow a lot more food here,
Yeah, so being prepared is always the best way. And one of the really technical question too, I've always wondered how you do those drawing things on your board. What's that? It's like this magic world that you enter into when you do that.
It's AI.
Ah, okay.
No, I'm just kidding. It's not. No, I'm joking. It's not AI.
I'm so gullible. Gosh.
No. It's not AI. It's human intelligence. No, I've always been a graphic artist for a long time. Since I was a kid, I'm drawing on there, and then we're flipping the image. So I'm not writing backwards or anything like that. That was a tool that was purchased by the university for me, basically, back in 2016, when we created the first Intro to Permaculture massive open online course. So they bought that, and I started, and if you look at my old drawings, they're a little more rudimentary. it's sort of like when you start to get comfortable with a tool, and I just started really understanding the potential of that. And then just recently, and this is, I guess, a little bit of it's not a secret, but it's just, we figured out it used to be that I'm looking at my paper and I'm just having to completely translate my paper onto the whiteboard. And so I have to work out the dimensions when I'm doing the drawing. And so the hardest part of the drawing is like working out the dimensions there. And I'm drawing, I'm looking at my paper and I'm measuring things and all that stuff. We recently, the guys at the university who have been doing the tech for me for all this time, they're like, hey, I think we could actually project your drawing up onto a monitor. And then, so I can look at the monitor and I can make a dot. And so I don't have to recreate the proportion. The proportion's all there. And I'm not tracing because I'm like looking at the monitor, but I can almost trace my drawing. At least I can get all the proportions correct. So now I can, and I was always doing it like pen and paper. And then I started using an iPad. And so now I use an iPad, but then with the iPad, I can really like work my proportions and work my layering really well. So I can plan it more advanced, and then I can put it up on the light board in a more advanced way. So if you look at, the stuff I've done, basically, I'd say in the last year in the light board I've been able to get much more technical because I don't have to spend all my time figuring out the scale while I'm drawing, basically.
Yeah, it's so effective. It's such a fantastic tool, and it just brings to life as you're speaking. It's wonderful. Yeah, it's really exciting.
I just want to captivate people. Like I want people to actually watch the videos who don't even care about the content. I want them to watch the videos just because it's interesting to watch.
Yeah.
And then
well, I think that's the thing too, because it's evolving as you're speaking, as you're describing. And so even if you can't understand English, you can kind of get a sense too what's going on as well, which is just brilliant. This whole kind of concept of permaculture education of really bringing it into this common space feels to me like something that is so important, and something that you just do so brilliantly, whether it be through video or through online accessible courses. Where do you want to take this? What's your big picture vision of sharing permaculture in the world, if you could unlock possibilities?
I mean, people ask me that sometimes, and to some degree I feel like I'm already living like what I was trying to do before. But at this point I have actually reached like some limitations where I want to, at least in the immediate, like if I had unlimited resources, I would be traveling with and doing very high production stories, almost continually. I mean, I guess that gets tiring after a while, but I would basically be doing what I'm doing now, but be doing much more of it. I mean, we want to bring back the Introduction to Permaculture free course. I think that humans, like that, we really have the capacity to fix our problems. And it's, education is one issue, and then will and inspiration is the other part. So I'm just trying to trigger those two different things. I almost like don't really have much of a grander vision other than what I'm just doing right now. I would like to just do more of that, and that's where, like, if there's anybody listening that really likes my stuff and you want to, like, I want to accelerate what I'm doing. And if I had more financial resources, I could accelerate. I could just do more work. I could do it faster. So that's what I'm hoping right now, is just to kind of ramp up what I'm actually already doing.
And I think too, for me, one of the biggest things as well is supporting as many people as possible to become permaculture educators themselves in whatever community and context they're in, and to find ways to accelerate that process. And that to me is a really important part, because if every community everywhere has people who can catalyze that action, maybe see something like what you've done and then ground it where they are and help to get it out. I mean, that to me seems like a really important part of the work as well.
Can I throw your question back at you though? Like, what's your grand vision?
Well, I think that, for me, that's where I'm, also telling the stories like what you were saying, and creating the context in which people can become confident, amazing permaculture educators with access to all this global knowledge and skills, and finding where that is to be able to ground that, whether you be in a refugee settlement, whether you be in the middle of New York, whether you be in Indigenous community in Australia, that there are the resources and support to actually be able to find, gather, and translate that. My other there is another sort of I don't know whether I should say that public, but what I would like to do is to create kind of like a shadow parliament and gather all of the people that I know around the world and in Australia who are like what I said to you before. I see you as, like a public professor, permaculture professor. Who are all the people who are focusing on health, on water, on soil, on food, on clothing, on whatever it might be, that we can be coming together to actually articulate this alternative vision. If there's some policy that comes out, something, we have another way of expressing it and getting it into the public media in a way that can counter that and go, look, actually, there's another way that we can be thinking about this. So this positive myceliation of public professors of good works.
Yeah, and actually, I thought of something else, which is this, which the thing about how Natalie Topa has gotten me into the door with being able to visit with the United Nations World Food Program. And that actually that's actually a goal of mine, to get this information in at the highest levels where people are doing large scale land restoration, humanitarian work, refugee work, all this stuff. It's like, these people should know permaculture. I mean, Natalie's a great example of someone who is in that system and is a permaculture person. And I've, met and heard of other people, but like that's at this point in my life, that's the holy grail. And I feel like this is the first little creaking in the door and getting some contact with those. I think
once the door creaks open, I think it will fling open. There's so many people in those systems that are really thinking about it. And I would like to say to everyone too, that permaculture is not a fringe, edgy thing. It is something that has been foregrounded everywhere, and it's actually what needs to be even foregrounded even more so as our way forward. So let's shift the paradigm on that and take it into the highest. And so, I talk a lot to people about really speaking up as high as you possibly can, to be like ambassadors for this. What's the highest possible place that you can take it? What's your capacity? And to speak it up, and then to connect. And I really see that there is this possibility of this notion of myceliation, so that rather than trying to fight a structure, it's that all of these projects and people and expertise around the world is actually connecting up. And every now and then we'll see these kind of like these little mushrooms pop up where, where you see that action, we just keep feeding that with more compost. And this strength of this network globally is so powerful that it's this unseen force. So wherever you scratch, you'll see it, can't you? I mean, you just scratch the surface of the soil in whatever community and you will find this way of thinking as a way of addressing the issues. So it's just continuously connecting up, telling the stories, sharing the stories, speaking it up, taking it to those places. And that's why we need to support the languaging, the perspective, the way of connecting in this. That's kind of my big picture of just. So that's why, podcasts and masterclasses and films and education and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we are of like mind, you and I.
Yeah. And, you just make it work, don't you? It's like there's no great pouring of funds onto this. You get a little bit of money from this and you make it work for that and you just keep it going.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that is going to pull this all through is like inspiration. I really feel like we're not going to fix the world with fear.
No.
Like it's just not an effective motivator. It motivates people in all sorts of ways, but not like constructive ways. It's gotta be, we have to spark people's spirit. We have to spark their creativity, their interest, their passion. And that's also what keeps, most people who are into permaculture, they're passionate. They're having a good life because they're in their garden. They're interacting, of course, on the flip side, it's like the dread can be stronger because you understand a little bit more what's happening, and you understand like the horrors of a clear cut or something like that, so you feel things harder. But I don't know, for me, like, action's the remedy.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's just more fuel in the belly to show up more and to invite more people into the space. And I think what you're saying there about catalyzing that spark, doesn't matter whether you're working, in an international level or whether you work in your local community. I just got an email the other day from someone saying, oh, could you do a piece on community gardening? And, why is it that people always disappear and there's only a couple of people left? Well, that kind of same approach, I think, is just as relevant there. How can you invite people into the space, make it that dynamic? So wherever you are, whether it be a neighborhood, a school project, and a regional project, to really cultivate that sense. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me in conversation today. And I wish you all the best in Senegal. And I'll make sure that all the links for all the films and resources that you've talked about will be in the show notes. So anyone who's listening can connect in. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you? What's your preferred method?
If you do want to get in touch with me, amillison@gmail.com. That's a good way. And you will get an automatic responder that says, sorry, I can't answer all my emails, but I will. I do read my emails.
Totally understandable.
But if you're that magic person that wants to, endow a position at Oregon State University or something like that, then, definitely get in touch. And I'm happy to talk to you for sure. Yeah. And also, I just want to say, Morag, I'm really, really happy to get to meet you here, in person, over online. I've seen your work and your name for years and years, and I'm just very happy to be able to, have a connection. So thank you very much.
Likewise. I'm glad you're able to slot in a small chat in between your visits around the world. So thank you for that. Yeah. Well, wishing you all the best. And thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. Great to see you.
Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World. Check out the show notes below to find links to the resources mentioned in this episode. Also, this is where you'll find details of all of our permaculture courses, our permaculture YouTube, blog, and free masterclasses and permaculture film clubs. Make sure you signed up to hear all of the news and updates. And come and join us at the Permaculture Education Institute to learn practical skills for designing and teaching permaculture and making a good livelihood while living a permaculture-inspired, one planet way of life. Take care, everyone. See you soon.